somebody that you can love. You know, he's lovable. Anyway, Howard, well, we'll give you the details of his biography. Basically, he was chairman of the art department, were you not, at Northern Kentucky University. He had a near-death experience, and he'll tell you all about that. And he's now a minister at Zion Church, United Church of Christ in Norwood, Ohio. So give a warm welcome, please, to Howard Storm.
Before anything else, I want to thank Diane, who's a wonderful hostess, even to the point of having fresh cut flowers in my room. And, you know, how can you go wrong when someone puts, a woman gives a man fresh cut flowers? I mean, you know, she's really a very, very loving and thoughtful person. And you're also blessed to have her because she's taken on this ministry at some sacrifice to herself. But, you know, we wouldn't otherwise. Happy to acknowledge the UU minister that's here, and we both go to the same hairdresser.
Yes, we do.
You know? And also, I've had the pleasure of getting to meet in the flesh Dr. Samus, who's here en route, circumnavigating the world. This is just a brief stop as he does his world tour, and it's nice to get to know him. We've been doing some email for a couple of years. Finally got to meet him in the flesh. I hope I haven't been too big a disappointment because, you know, you see me warts and all now, right? I'll just go right into the story, and if at any time anybody wants to, you know, raise your hand, ask a question or a clarification about that, that's okay, because I can probably pick up on it. And I have to do this pretty fast because I also want to allow some time at the end for a conversation, hopefully with you, so I'll try and do this in about an hour. First of all, real quick background. I was born in 1946 in a suburb of Boston, Massachusetts. My father had been a Lieutenant JG during World War II, served in the South Pacific in Pago Pago, New Guinea, in naval supply operations. My mom was a nurse. I had two older sisters, and when my dad came back from the war, we and our whole neighborhood and what seemed like the whole world, of course from a child, it was just, you know, our little neighborhood and a few streets either way. It seemed like everybody went to church on Sunday. There was an illusion that on Sunday, everybody went to church. In Massachusetts at the time, we had blue laws, and there was nothing open. Very few gas stations, if any, were open. No stores were open except for a few stores in Massachusetts were selected that could sell milk and bread only, and that was it. You could not buy gum or anything else. On Sunday morning, people went to church. A lot of people went and did church activities in the afternoon or in the evening. Church was kind of social center of people's life. And there were no soccer games scheduled for the kids on Sunday morning, which is what somebody here at my church all the time. Oh, gee, we haven't been there for the past 2 months because we've had soccer. You know, I'm like, okay, whatever. I'm easy. One of the things that I noticed about church when I was started to have some conscious awareness of what was on is all that nice stuff that was said in the church seemed to have no meaning or practice in our home. One of my fond memories of church is being slapped around in the pew with a discreet sort of backhanded whack for fidgeting. Some of you resonate with the backhanded whack for fidgeting. That great insult to the Lord Almighty that you would fidget in church and get whacked in church. Well, the preacher's out there teaching about love. You know, what's wrong with this picture? And then when we, of course, got into the car, and I'm not saying this to dishonor my father, who's somewhere in this universe now. Hopefully I'll get you when you get up here. My dad would start the beatings the minute we got in, as soon as those car doors closed in the parking lot, you know. I told you not to behave that way, and wham, bam, you know, cussing and swearing and stuff like that. We never, there was never a Bible opened in my household. There was never a prayer said, except that we did have a show prayer at Christmas, Easter, and Thanksgiving. There was a show prayer, but it was pretty formal and brief. And it was because we had a lot of company. My mom was a great cook, so our house was always the center of the family meals. In terms of the mores that were taught in church, the ethical teachings, I didn't see any resemblance between that and what was practiced in my home. My home was a hotbed of hatred, bigotry, cruelty, and violence. And when I became 14, 15 years old, although I had been somewhat interested in religion, I was beginning to be pretty skeptical of its meaning in my family and in society in general, and started looking at other things, such as philosophy, and pretty quickly moved my way on. This was a self-guided search, philosophical search. I moved my way into Nietzsche, who of course is very anti-God. And I mean, Nietzsche hated Christ with a passion. And then moved from there into first Albert Camus, starting off with A Stranger, which I was so passionate in love with. I took French seriously enough to be able to read it in French, which was a real commitment on my part. And then moved from there into Jean-Paul Sartre. And then, of course, I struggled and claimed to have read Martin Heidegger, but I can't for the life of me tell you what I really understood about it. Nobody can understand Heidegger. He wrote it, and he was speaking in tongues, you know. Anyhow, so when I went to college at the ripe old age of 17 years old and took Philosophy 101 with Mr. Dickens, my first semester, he was a atheist, he was an existentialist, he was a real left politically and stuff like that. And he saw a fellow traveler in the making, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, and he would take me out to, I went to Denison University for a year, and he would take me up to Newark, Ohio, which was wet, Denison being dry, and we would stay up until the bars closed with some of our other friends, Ed and Bobby, and smoking unfiltered Camel cigarettes and drinking draft beer and thinking great thoughts. I don't have any conscious memory of any of those conversations either. We were sort of polluted, but it was so wonderful for an adult, a man, an adult man who was not my grandfather, because I had two wonderful grandfathers, to have an adult man take you seriously and to speak like an adult with you and listen to what you had to say and encourage you and things like that. I mean, I was completely enamored of Mr. Dickens and what he had to teach. He was an extreme cynic. And one of the beauties about being an atheist cynic is that you can look down on everybody, because everything that everybody believes is beneath you. You know, so it's kind of an interesting place to be. Not ultimately satisfactory, which I want to get into later, but it's really great because everybody is stupid except you. You know, so it gives you quite a sense of an inflated ego to be able to put down everybody's beliefs. The only thing that I would say that we could agree upon, Ed and Bobby and Mr. Dickens and I, was that science was reality, and science was the only true revelation of reality. Then, very quickly, I left Denison, got married, ultimately went out to San Francisco in 1965 because we heard that there was something happening out there. And lo and behold, I ended up in the right place at the right time. Because to be in San Francisco in the late 60s was just a wonderful choice. And there was you you may know of it as the hippie movement or something like that, but what it really was a great, gigantic awakening of hedonism. People were doing whatever they wanted to do, to the most extremes and excesses that you could possibly imagine. Now, I wasn't quite that extreme because I was married, I was working a full-time job and going to school full-time, and my wife was also working part-time because I wasn't getting any support from my father, and I was trying to go to college so that I could become a college professor. And so I was pretty busy. I was burning the candle at both ends. I worked from 10 at night till 5 in the morning, and went to school at 9 a.m., came home at 5, watched the kid while my wife went to work, and she got home at 9 so that I could get down to work at 10. So that was 5 days a week, and you know, on the days off it was pretty much like, can I get a little sleep, please? You know, I can't even believe we did that. It's so crazy now looking back on it. But anyhow, there were people having sexual relationships with hundreds of people a month, hundreds. You know, and it's just like, I mean, physiologically, this is like, you know, miraculous that there was the other thing that happened was drugs became more and more and more important, and people were going out into areas that were clearly, I mean, it can be scary because people that you knew and cared a lot about were clearly becoming psychotic. I'll never forget the time in an English class at the San Francisco Art Institute, a friend of mine got up and said, "I am the Christ, I am the Christ!" And we're all going like, oop, he's over the top. He's like, whew, you know, somebody get a rope and pull him in because he's gone too far. And I mean, he wasn't, this was not for theatrical reasons. He was gone, bye-bye. He had been dropping acid every day for a period of several months, and finally his consciousness expanded. Anyhow, in 1972, having graduated from the University of California, Berkeley, MA and a terminal degree, MFA in art, I went to Kentucky to be a part of the building of an art department at a brand new school that was just opening in literally in a pasture called Northern Kentucky State College at the time, which later became a university, and pursued the American dream, which I feel put me in the majority of our culture, which was meism, careerism, completely self-centered life in the pursuit of material well-being and hopefully, in addition to that, some fame as an artist. And it was my perception at that time and for the next 13 years that that's what everybody was doing. I never was receiving any contradictory information from my culture, meaning the people that I knew, the television, the magazines, the newspapers, the radio, anything, that everybody else was doing exactly the same thing. So in the 70s and 80s, it seemed like everybody was out, you know, you're out there for yourself, dog-eat-dog world, and you know, the people that I hung out with felt the same thing. No Christian ever spoke to me, no one ever proselytized, and matter of fact, we used to have an evangelist that used to come on the campus, and this person was incredibly obnoxious. They would get up there and harangue the people. We would walk by and shake their head, you know, what a poor dolt that person is that would be out there, you know, trying to evangelize us for Christ, because we were, of course, far superior to anything like that. This person just seemed so pitiable. On June 1st, 1985, so that's my background, and I tried to, in the background, besides giving you certain factual statements, I was trying to give you sort of a state of mind, you know, which was, if you didn't pick it up, I'll spell it out for you, pretty darn arrogant, you know. On June 1st, 1985, I was taking a group of students around, and my wife was along, and on Saturday morning, which was the last day of the trip, that next day we were going to drive to Schiphol in Amsterdam and fly home, and we've been on a 3-week tour of art museums and galleries and castles and things. At 11 o'clock in the morning, in our hotel room with, my wife was there, and I was talking to one of my favorite students, Monica Schoner, who, if you sprechen Sie Deutsch, she was Schoner. Yeah? Yeah. And in mid-sentence, I collapsed to the floor screaming. And I was screaming because of the pain and the terror. And what had happened was, in my, your esophagus goes to your stomach, which goes to what's called the small stomach or duodenum, and then that goes into your intestinal tract. My small stomach had erupted, broken, perforated, and the gastric juices of the small stomach were leaking into my abdominal cavity, and it was a acute, very specific, intense pain. Matter of fact, the most intense pain I'd ever experienced in my life. And I had been in a car accident and some other things, so I'd had some experience of pain before, but never anything like this. But the thing that was terrifying, it was like in me, in the middle of me. So I'm on the ground looking up at the glass French doors out into this little balcony. And the curtains were closed, and there was no rustling of the curtain, and there was no broken glass, which was, I couldn't figure it out because I was pretty certain I had been shot by a sniper. Why? Because I hadn't heard the noise of the shot, but I'd felt the pain of a hole in me. Interestingly enough, looking back on it now, I blew a hole in me. But that maybe, you know, I don't know if there'll be time to get into that, how, you know, I really believe that in my spiritual struggle, that this had created this situation of the perforation. Anyways, I don't want to digress on that. I'm going to go through this medical part as quickly as possible because it's sort of boring. My wife called the desk called an emergency service. A very nice doctor came, got me off the floor with a great deal of difficulty and onto the bed and examined me and knew exactly what was wrong and told us that I had a perforation of the duodenum and I had to go to the hospital and have a surgery. And that this was not that big a deal. I'd be at the hospital very soon, have the surgery immediately, and in a matter of several weeks I would be well enough to return to the United States, and within 6 to 8 weeks I could return to my work. So, and he also administered what he told us was a very small amount of morphine because I was in real agony. And he said he couldn't give me too much because I would be having the surgery very soon. He didn't want the morphine to interfere with the anesthetics that I would be receiving in surgery. So, off these two young Frenchmen came and they, I was in such pain it was very difficult for me to do anything. So with one under each arm they got me into the elevator, which was a two-person elevator, so the three of us rode this two-person elevator down to the first floor of the Hotel de Lima on the Rue Saint-Germain, and you all know where the first floor is at the Hotel de Lima on the Rue Saint-Germain, right? Yeah, it's one floor above the street. So then, how do you get this big, Le Grand American, down to the street? So they got a chair, a wooden chair, and put me on the chair, and they put me on their shoulders and carried me down. And they're like, I thought I was going to have a near-death experience right there. Spiral staircase. And it's really scary. They put me in a little micro ambulance, and I was screaming and yelling for them to allow my wife to get in, so they allowed her to get in the front seat. Well, that man got in the back with me, and we went 60, 70 miles an hour through Paris. That little van going, ee, ee, and that, can anybody do the French ambulance sound? Yeah, right. Can anybody do that? You saw it in World War II movies, you know what I mean? Yeah. You know. So we're going through Paris like that, real crazy. And we drove many miles, I think maybe like 8 or something. And we're going through red lights and everything. We got to the hospital, and two women doctors come out, one of whom looks like Jean Moreau. I'm happy now. You know, I got John Moreau.
And morphine.
And morphine. I mean, you know, life is good, right? And they take my history, tell me I'm going to be taken to another hospital, have this surgery. They x-ray me and stuff like that. And they also put a tube down me, down my nose. And so they put me on a gurney, and off we go, several blocks away, with me on the stainless steel gurney, outside, across the sidewalks and streets, so bumpity, 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 bumpity. And we go to a surgical hospital called Cochin. You want to remember Cochin, because if anything ever happens to you in Paris, remember, don't go to Cochin. Whatever you do, don't go to Cochin. You'll thank me later. Anyhow, anybody knows what Cochin means? Pig. Pig. Went to the pig hospital. Yeah. Merci. So we go to Cochin, they put me in a room, and I have this wonderful roommate by the name of Monsieur Florent, who is a 68-year-old retired Frenchman, and his wife's father had fought in World War I and stayed in Paris and married his wife's mother, and they had had this Monsieur Florent's wife, and so she was real pro-American, and she spoke good English, and she was gorgeous, and Monsieur Florent was the just perfect gentleman, and handsome and wonderful, and they were very nice to my wife and I. And I lay in that bed for about 10 hours. Never saw a doctor, and when the nurse would come in, I would say, my wife would say, and Monsieur Florent and Madame Florent would say, at of course increasing levels of intensity, I need medication, I need an operation, I'm dying, I need help, I'm not going to make it. And the nurses would go, you know, what can we do? There's no doctor. And for reasons that are hard to appreciate, but not too difficult to understand, because it was a Saturday afternoon on the weekend, that's a French word, in the summertime, June, there was no surgeon available to see me or to do an operation, or even nobody bothered to come in the room, so nobody took my temperature, my blood pressure. So anyways, don't ask me, like, if I have a death certificate or anything. I didn't have a doctor. I mean, like, okay, check it out. I didn't have a pillow. I didn't have a blanket. I didn't have anything. I had an iron bed that had one position flat, and my wife went out and stole some towels and linens and rolled them up and made me a pillow. And she went and found a sheet so that I could have a sheet to cover me, because there was only a bottom sheet, not a top sheet. So if you get the picture, that's what I had. So it wasn't like there was, you know, I was on the respirator and the, you know, there was no machinery in that room. As the morphine was wearing off, and as the gastric acids began to creep throughout my abdominal cavity, not only was the pain intensifying, but the area of the pain was intensifying, and eventually it became a pain that was basically from my groin up to my collarbones. And what this pain felt like, without any exaggeration whatsoever, was it felt like fire. And in fact, at one point I told my wife to get a knife, because I was going to cut the pain out. And if she'd gotten me a knife, I would have cut the pain out. I mean, I was just going to take a knife and rip myself open and pull everything out. And you may find that hard to believe, but that would not have hurt, because I couldn't have hurt any more than I was already hurting. At 8:30 that night, and for hours I'd been telling my wife and Monsieur Florent, and they had been telling the nurses and stuff, that I was dying. I wasn't going to make it much longer. At 8:30 that night, a nurse came in and said they were very sorry, they were unable to locate a doctor, and they were trying to get one for the next day, Sunday. And when she said that, it was like, you know, it was taps, you know, da da da. It was time to let go of this world of agony and go into the great big black curtain down, lights off, the end. And I knew, as I believed any rational human being who was not living in a dream world delusion, that when you die, you die. You and I knew, or I thought I knew, that you are and I am a biochemical organism that for some crazy reason had developed a consciousness that gave it a consciousness of consciousness. You know, animals have a consciousness, but they don't have a consciousness of consciousness. And this consciousness of my consciousness gave me a sense of identity. And like, there were people, crazy people in the world that had this fantasy that somehow this could be existent, independent of the biochemical mechanism. But I was not under that illusion. I knew that when you died, you died. So, I told my wife it was time for me to die, and she got up, and this is a difficult part for me to talk about, so I'll make this as superficial as possible. She got up and hugged me and kissed me, and we said our goodbyes, and I told her to my parents that I love them, tell my kids that I love them, and all that stuff, and I loved her, and she loved me, and eventually she was crying harder than I'd ever seen her cry in my life, and she's told me afterwards many times that was the worst day of her life. And she eventually sat back down, and I was lying there on my side, looking at her in worse emotional shape than I'd ever seen her before. She was just wretched, and I figured this is as good a time as any, so I closed my eyes in the hopes that I would cease to be. And I went unconscious, and then the next thing I knew, I was conscious, and I was standing up, and I was really surprised that I was standing up next to the bed. I was surprised that I was conscious, and as I began to think about, this is all happening really quickly, I realized that, I knew where I was, I needed to have an operation, I knew I had a perforated stomach, blah, 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 I knew all that stuff, but I also knew that I didn't have this searing pain anymore. I knew about the problem, but I wasn't experiencing it. And as I tried to do a reality check, I realized that my senses were more heightened than they had ever been in my life. To give you just a couple examples, I could feel with exquisite detail the texture of the floor, the linoleum floor of the hospital room with the soles of my feet. I could smell Monsieur Florent in the bed next to me. I could smell his feet, I could smell his crotch, I could smell his armpits, I could smell his hair. I could move up and down him and smell all those different parts of him. I could see with complete depth of field. Nothing was out of focus or in focus. Everything was in the most detailed focus. Everything in front of me, and because I was, had been an artist all my life, I was also aware that my field of vision was much more than it had ever been before. Like your normal field of vision is about 160 degrees, and now my field of vision seemed like, is this 360 or is it 320? Because this is really weird, because I see almost everything in this room all simultaneously in focus. That's really strange. My taste, sense of hot and cold, everything was heightened. And as I was examining the room, looking at the bed that I had been in, it now had a new occupant. And there was somebody in the bed with a sheet pulled up to their neck, faced away from me, turned towards my wife. And so I had to bend over to see the profile of this person. And to my surprise, the profile of this person made me think of my own profile. That person's profile, the new occupant in my bed, had a profile remarkably like my profile. So I began to inquire of my wife, first nicely, and then I rapidly moved up into expletives deleted. Expletives deleted. What, dear, is happening here? And who's that in my bed? She did not respond. Matter of fact, her eyelashes didn't move, her body didn't move. She was absolutely still. So I came to the only logical conclusion that one could conclude in a situation like that she was really, really mad at me. Right? Because that's what your wife does to you when they're really mad. You get nothing. They won't even look at you. So she wasn't responding. So I gave up on her, and I turned to Monsieur Florent, who had just been so good to us. And I put my face, and he was sitting up in bed, his eyes were open, and I put my face in front of his face, and I screamed at him, and there was no response. Now I was getting worried, agitated, nervous, anxious, because, I'm beginning to have thoughts like, am I losing my mind? Because this is all too crazy. It's just too crazy. things don't work like this. And at that time, I heard people calling from outside the room. And they were saying in English, very plain and simple, "Howard, hurry up, come with us, let's go, it's time." And I went over to the doorway of the room and looked out into the hallway, and it was very gray and foggy, not dark, not light. If anything, it was silvery, or even to be more specific, it was like dull aluminum. And there were people back in that haziness, and they appeared to be male and female, all adults. And I said, "Are you from the doctor? I'm very sick, I'm supposed to have an operation. I've been here a long, long time. I'm supposed to have the operation. I arrived at this hospital, and it's been hours." And they said, "We know all about you. We've been waiting for you a long time. Let's go. We don't have time to waste. Hurry up." And I asked a few more questions, and they were, "We're leaving now. Come on." You know, so I went out the door into the hallway with these people, and they pretty much immediately encircled me and started leading me off into the haze, fog, grayness, whatever. And as we were leaving that place, I looked back at that doorway several times and realized that that was a one-way doorway that I'd gone through. I don't know why I thought that, but I knew that I could not re-enter the room of light. It would be impossible. Even if I could leave these people and go back to that doorway, which I was beginning to think about might not be a bad idea, that it was a one-way opening. And we walked and walked and walked, and I know, because I've been a teacher, and by the way, I've rarely ever seen an art classroom that had a clock, or if they did have a clock, that it ever worked. Art classrooms don't have clocks, or they don't have working clocks, and so when you, as an art teacher, one of the things you develop is a sense of time. I had a pretty good sense of time. I could pretty, much tell what time it was, just had a sense of it. And I was very aware that that was not operating for me at all. There was a real sense of a loss of a sense of time, which felt very strange. But anyways, we walked, and I would say to replicate that walk, I would have to walk something like 50 or 100 miles to replicate the walk. And as we walked, I did notice that the atmosphere was getting increasingly dense, heavy, a sense of moistness, and ever imperceptibly darker. We finally came upon a place where it was so dark I couldn't even see my hand in front of my face, and I was terrified. The people along the way had become harsher and nastier and ultimately rude and vulgar with me as a subject, and I said to them, "I'm not going any further," which was in fact a bluff, and I knew it because I had no idea which way was back, left, right, or anything. I was just completely confused in this darkness. But I didn't want to be with these people anymore. And they said, "You're almost there." And they began to push and pull at me, and I fought back with them. And I played some football in high school, and track and field and wrestling, and felt really capable of fighting and defending myself. So we struggled. But initially, if there had been a dozen of these people, now there was a multitude. In this darkness, I mean, what would I know? But there were a lot of voices, a lot of hands, a lot of people. And they were playing with me, and it was absolutely evident that they had no interest in destroying me. Diane, you can tell these people I love cats, right? Tell them I love cats, I really do. But they were playing with me the way a domestic, well-fed cat plays with a mouse when they find one. They were going to take me apart bit by bit and savor every minute of it. It started off with punching and kicking and hitting, and pretty rapidly came into scratching and biting. And then it got much, much worse, and they did horrible things, which we don't talk about. But you don't want to know about it either, and I don't want to talk about it. And this went on and on and on, and people have often asked me, like, what did it feel like? And I said, use your imagination. That's what it felt like. It just felt the way it would feel. I mean, it hurt. But what hurt more than the physical things that they were doing to me was that they were doing it to me. There was an incredible loud roar around us as we were doing this. They said the cruelest, most horrible things. And these people, initially, my sense was, were complete and utter strangers. And that they would do this to me made no sense at all. And that's what hurt more their lack of compassion more than the physical things that they were doing. Eventually, I was not responsive anymore because I was too broken, ripped, exhausted physically and emotionally, and lying in a fetal position on the ground. And people were kicking, trying to get some kind of stimulation from me. And I heard, and it's weird when I say, now this is strange, because the whole thing's strange, right? But this is more strange. I heard my voice, which seemed to emanate from my chest, and it certainly didn't come from my lips or throat, say, pray to God. And I thought, I don't believe in God. Dumb idea. Second time, I heard my voice say to me, pray to God. And I thought, don't know how to pray, haven't prayed in, 23 years or something. I don't pray. Third time, but it seemed like the third time was slightly more emphatic. Pray to God. And I'm thinking, when I was a kid, I prayed. Now, I want you to understand, I do not believe in God, I don't believe in prayer or anything like that, but I'm hearing this voice saying pray to God, and I'm in this desperate situation with no apparent solution. So I'm thinking, when I was a kid, we had learned some prayers, and they sound like, let's see, trying to remember back a quarter of a century, they sound like, God bless America, land that I love, yea, though I walk through the valley of shadow of death, for amber waves of grain, one nation, under God, for liberty and justice for all. And I realize that I'm kind of making a muddle of it. But with the mention of God in this darkness, the people who were all around me and finding me very lacking, because I was no longer able to respond to them anymore, they could not bear every time I mentioned God. They just went absolutely crazy. They turned into furies, and they were telling me with language unlike anything I've ever heard in my life in this world in terms of its obscenity and vulgarity. They were saying, there is no God, nobody can hear you. And they were also telling me, now we are going to really hurt you. I mean, it made it really clear to me that there was new levels of torment and terror that I hadn't even imagined that they were going to bring me into, draw me into. But I also noticed with all their threats and all of their shouting that they were retreating away from me in the darkness. Keep in mind, it's complete darkness, so I can't see anything, I can only hear them, but they're backing off and backing off, which makes me try to think of phrases that have God in it more. So I'm just, anything that comes to mind, I'm letting them have it. And I'm throwing a few dirty words in there too to give it a little more impact. And they're backing off and backing off. And I'm shouting and trying to think of things and shouting them out. And pretty soon, I realized the only thing I can hear in this darkness is myself. And so I'm all alone in this place. And it's kind of a difficult thing to do real quick. Some of you may get this and some of you may not. But eternity is not a succession of moments that extends out into infinity. That is not what eternity is. Eternity is a moment that expands outward in every dimension forever. Right? You with me? I was in eternity. How long I was there is like a completely irrelevant question. I was there for years, okay? Minutes, hours, whatever. I had an opportunity to think about my life. I had an opportunity to think about my situation, and the brief thumbnail sketch of that is, I began to think that I was not in the world. I didn't know where I was, but it wasn't Earth. It was someplace else. And that because I went over my life and thought about how I had been a terrible husband to my wife, and no, I'm not going to tell you what I did. You know what I did. I was a terrible father. I hated my father and he hated me. that's kind of like a big impediment to having a relationship with your mother when your mom and dad live together, right? I had little to do with my sisters, and my students were becoming increasingly a nuisance in my life. As I thought over my life, I said, well, my life has been a big, rotten mess, a big zero, and that somehow I had died in the world, and I had been flushed down the toilet of the universe, and now I was in the cesspool. That was the level of my theological understanding. Aren't you glad that I went to seminary so I don't talk like that anymore? I had gone down the cesspool of the universe, and that I also came to the terrible realization, and this is very difficult for me to say, so I've practiced this hundreds of times so I could say it. No kidding. I found that the people who had been hurting me were people just like me. They were my brothers and sisters in spirit. They were my buddies. These are the people that I'd hung out with the world, and we'd gone to Arnold's Bar and Grill on 8th Street in Cincinnati. Huh? Huh? Any of you there? You don't look familiar. You know it? We used to go there on Friday, Saturday night and get loaded and discuss the anatomical characteristics of the young ladies in the room. You know, that was our main topic. Or what jerks our colleagues were. Those are other favorite topics. These were those people, my kindred spirits, my soulmates, were the people that I had met in that place. And I realized that I was like them and they were like me. And that it was now my destiny to be with them forever and ever and ever. And it also occurred to me that in this place, the best thing was to join them and not fight them anymore. Okay, to become as absolutely dispassionate and cruel and rotten as they were. Except I didn't want to do that. So I'm kind of stuck because I'm too broken and ripped to know where to go. I don't know where to go. There's no way out of this mess, and I lay there sinking deeper and deeper into self-pity and despair. When I had the most vivid memory of myself as a little child sitting in a Sunday school classroom singing Jesus Loves Me. And what the memory was of myself as a little boy singing, Jesus loves me, da-na-na, Jesus loves me, da-na-na, Jesus loves me, da-na-na. And more importantly than the song or even the words was, a very vivid memory of being a little kid believing that there was this like super guy, you know, Superman, Wonder Man, called Jesus, who was out there but also my buddy. That's what they taught us in Sunday school, that he is your friend, you know. What a friend we have in Jesus. You know, that's what I do, that's what I believe, that there was this guy, and he loved me, and he cared about me. Then I had a really bad thought, well, since I had hated his guts for, you know, over 20 years, why would he have anything to do, even if he did exist, which he probably doesn't exist, but if he were, hypothetically to exist, why would he be interested in me? Since he had heard his name off my lips many times a day, but only in a negative context. So why would he respond to me? And so I started to have this theological argument in my head, and I thought, this is ridiculous. You know, I want out. I don't care. I'm going for it. So I yelled out into the darkness as an act of complete faithlessness, but total desperation. If you can make that fine distinction there. I yelled out, Jesus, please save me. Unbeknownst to me, sounding very much like a Southern Baptist. And a tiny little light appeared in that darkness, and it got incredibly bright, fast. So it's very startling. And if that light were to appear in this room right now, all of our eyeballs would be seared out of our heads. But it was not searing. In fact, it was the most wonderful experience of my life, before or since. And coming out of this light as it came over me, and I got to see for the first time in this place of darkness, how utterly torn and ripped and gore and filthy and horrible I was. I was roadkill now. Hands came out of this light, reached down, touching me, lifting me up to it, and as in those few seconds that I was being lifted up, all the pain went, all the wounds went, all the emotional angst was replaced with the greatest love and acceptance and joy that I wish I so much wish I could share that with you, and I cannot, because I can't describe it. All I can do is try and live it, and hopefully you'll say the guy's sincere. That's all I can do, but I cannot. I wish I could, but I can't give it to you. You got to get it for yourself. I guess that's the way it works. He held me to him, and I knew my friend, whom some little lady had taught me in Sunday school, was the real McCoy. I knew that he not only loved me in an impossible love beyond human expression, but I also knew that he knew me with I just knew this with an intimacy that I didn't possibly know myself with. I knew that he knew everything, every thought, every deed, everything I'd ever done in my life. I knew that I knew that this guy was the man, you know. And there he was. He showed up. First time in my life I ever called on him and he showed up. It was just like unbelievable. And so he's patting my back because I'm having a major emotional episode. Because for the first time in my adult life, it's safe to cry. You know, I was raised by Lieutenant J.G. Howard Storm, and you know, men don't cry. And I had never really allowed myself to cry or to feel any authentic emotions in my entire life other than sexual desire. And with Jesus, it was just so safe to just release it all. So I am like, you know, snot's coming out of my nose, and, you know, my face is just a river of tears, and he's patting me on the back, and all of a sudden I realize, we're out of here. We're going. So we're taken out of that, we're going out of the place. It reminded me of a helicopter ride I had once in Oakland, California. If you want to know what it felt like. I mean, there's no sensation. It's not like you go down the runway and take off. This is just, oh, we're going, without the noise part, without the whoop, 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 whoop. And we're moving through space. I'm hanging on to him because I'm like, you know, I'm a very intelligent guy. I'm thinking, what if he drops me? You know, so I'm hanging on to him real tight. And he's holding on to me, and he's comforting me. And I'm trying to get my act together to look out. And what we're moving towards is a world of light, with light, lots of little pieces of light going towards it, coming from it. And we're moving away from this world of darkness. And all of a sudden, I'm beginning, you know, speaking of the light's beginning to dawn in my little brain, like God, heaven. And I'm thinking, oops, I've made a big mistake in my life. Because I hated God and was very vocal about it, which in a state university, you're very welcome to express your unbelief. You're just not allowed to express any kind of belief. And I thought to myself, I'm a terrible piece of filth, but I thought of a much stronger language than that. And he's made a terrible mistake because I don't belong here. And with that, we stopped our progress towards the light, and he spoke to me telepathically for the first time. His voice was of a young male. It was his voice that I could hear in my head. And pretty soon, I caught on that he could hear the thoughts in my head. Because I wasn't speaking, I was thinking, and he was reading it all, hearing it all. I guess Jesus is a psychic, huh? He said, we don't make mistakes. You belong here. Not a real conversation stopper, you know, like, okay. So we began to converse, and we got a little ways in the conversation. He said, I've got some friends I want you to meet. So he made musical tones and a number of these things that I thought were light came and hovered around us, and came to realize that these were intelligent beings. Matter of fact, they were highly intelligent beings. I like to refer to them as angels. Angels, you know, extremely general term meaning messenger of God. I'm quite sure that some of these people had probably been human beings when I had been a human being, but had gone on earlier. Some of these people told me, and it was quite clear that they had been hanging around me as angels all of my life, also known as guardian angels, and that they now were following my progress and with me. And they, you know, they're trying to introduce us. So one of the things they said to me, would you like to see us in a human form? And I thought, why would I want to see you in human form? I hate people and I never want to see another person as long as I live. And they said, okay, that's fine, whatever. You know, whatever, you know, makes you happy, we're accommodate you. It's really interesting because people think they're going to go to heaven and, you know, you're just going to get like crushed, you know. Ha-ha, you were 4 years old and you stepped on the crack. Right? You're out of here. You know, heaven's not like that. These people have a loving, generous spirit. They want you in heaven. You have to fight them tooth and nail, you know, to not go to heaven. Because if you respond to their love, they're going to respond to that by loving you more and guiding you more. It's you know, God wants every single human being to go to heaven. People have to reject God and God's love to not go to heaven. So all you got to do, it's not like you have to work that hard. All you got to do is cooperate. Cooperate with the plan, the very plan that brought you into existence. Anyhow, so they say, we'd like to show you your life. I go, oh great, you know, being the egotist I was and still am, it's like, I get to be the center of attention. I've got all these people, you know, I got Jesus, I got the angels, what more do you want, you know? And we're going to talk about my favorite subject, me, you know? So they show me coming into the world, and I'm a little baby, and Howard and Wilma Storm get their first son after the tremendous disappointment of having 2 girls. Sorry. That's the way my father thought. I don't believe that. I don't believe it. My daughter's much better than my son. You can tell him that. I mean, my daughter's attentive and she gives me birthday gifts. What does my son do? You know, borrows money. Anyhow, my mom and dad, they're so happy. My sisters love me, you know, and they love having a little baby brother and stuff like that. Time goes on, we're playing softball out in the street, you know, with the neighbors, and everything's just fun. More time goes on, my father gets a big promotion and moves from like a salesman into a manager's job. And instead of working 8 hours a day, he's now working, you know, 12, 14 hours a day, and putting in time on Saturday and Sunday. His whole disposition changes, decides we have to move on up, so we go to a bigger house and a bigger mortgage and stuff like that. No more baseball, no more happy dad. Instead we get like a real emotionally and physically exhausted dad who comes home late at night because he's out there making money so we can have this big house so we can look like we're prospering and living the American dream. And we're all supposed to pretend that this is Ozzie and Harriet, Father knows best, and it's not Ozzie and Harriet and Father knows best, right? It's just your, you know, good old plain American dysfunctional family instead. Let the beatings commence. And then I see something that really shocks me. I see how I'm like getting back at my dad, but I'm smart because like I'm playing passive-aggressive to his aggressive-aggressive, right? And I'm getting my licks in, but I can go around and pretend that I'm the victim, you know? So I'm like, I'm the victim of this cruel father. In fact, I'm playing a passive-aggressive game that just makes me look like the victim because I'm giving it back to him just the way he's dishing it out at me. And this really horrifies me because I never understood it that way before. I always thought he was the monster and I was the good guy. And it wasn't true. We were just locked into bad dynamics in this relationship. I see in my life review God trying to reach me by giving me a gift of the most beautiful, wonderful, sweetest woman. 14 years old, God sees this jerk, me, going the wrong way. So he brings this babe into my life. His name is Beverly, who I proposed to her on our first date. 14 years old. She went home and told her dad, and her dad said, "You're never going out with that kid again." Because her dad thought, I know what he's after, which was only half true. I really did want to marry her the minute I saw her in that two-piece bathing suit. Oh, it's going to kill me if she hears it. She knows this. She knows all this stuff. So anyways, God wanted to teach me how to love. That's why he brought this young woman into my life. And she's been teaching me how to love for the past, let's see, 38, 42 years now from that day. She's been teaching me how to love. And I'm finally figuring it out. I'm a very slow learner. I mean, after 42 years, I'm beginning to understand it. I went, woohoo! And jumped her bones. Right? Because you all know what I was thinking, and that's not what she was after, but we got married when we were 18. The baby came quick. I saw God trying to reach to me and to us through that baby. I mean, what's the best way that you can teach someone how to love is to give them something to love and care about and raise. Right? You got a better idea? I think that's God's perfect plan to teach us, is the gift of children, and I didn't do too good a job. Because to me, kids were things to show your ego to the rest of the world. My kids were great in restaurants. They were great in restaurants. You know why they were so good in restaurants? Because I'd clobber them if they weren't. They were scared to death of acting up in a restaurant. My grandkids are awful in restaurants because my son and daughter don't punish their kids. I knew how to keep a kid in line, with physical violence. I hated my life review. I absolutely came to hate it. And I said many, many times, let's not watch this anymore. This is really awful. And they said, you need to see this stuff. The other thing that they were doing to me is they were also the audience of my life review. And they would share their unhappiness, displeasure, and pain with me when we saw things that were distasteful. And they also shared their joy with me when they saw things that were loving and compassionate. The problem was that the loving and compassionate things were decreasing as I got older, and the self-centered, complete lack of caring about other people was becoming more and more prevalent as I got older. So it was not much fun sharing my life with these people. Finally, we got to a stopping point. And they said, do you have any questions? And my exact thoughts were, I've got a million questions. And they said, ask whatever you like. So then they proceeded to vividly, experientially show me the answers to all my questions. And this went on for a very long time. There were hundreds and hundreds of questions, so obviously we can't go into all that. But to give you an example of what I mean, I would ask them a question about life on other planets. So they would parade intelligent life forms from other worlds in front of me. And when we went past the jellyfish people into the gaseous squiggly people, I said, okay, cool, got it, you know. I mean, the humanoids I liked, you know, the people that had like heads and arms, even if they had like 11 of them, that was fun. But when you go into the squishy gaseous people, it's like, you know, because they look like something you wouldn't want to see, you know, in the kitchen, you know, lose your appetite. So I was like, okay, you know, I've seen enough of intelligent life forms all over the universe. And then crazy things like, we got into a big discussion of war, and I was like questioning God's intelligence and goodwill, not too arrogant, by saying like, why did God allow war? And we had this big discussion. We finally got into, I was going to nail God down now on this one. Why the Holocaust? Ha! You know, answer that one. So they said, okay, come on, let's go. So we went to a camp. I don't know whether we went to the camp or the camp came to us. I don't know how they do it. It was just, all of a sudden we were in a camp, and I spoke and understood German. Nobody could see me, nobody could see the angels. And they were unloading a train. And they were incredibly brutal to these people. And I was saying, why to my guides. And they said, look up in the sky. And I looked, and there was this great plume of smoke from several chimneys going up in the sky. And I said, look into the smoke. And I looked into the smoke, and it was full of people, full of joy, full of happiness, full of radiant beauty, being received by angels who were coming down from heaven and taking them up to heaven. And I heard one of the guards say, take these people to the angel maker. And it occurred to me that these people's suffering, although as horrible as it was only a moment, only a temporary, and then they were being taken up into bliss and up into heaven. And it made it quite clear to me that God hated that concentration camp, hated what those people were doing to his people, but he had to allow us, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes, to do our evil. God has given us a tremendous gift of free will, and sometimes God just won't stop the evil from going on. Sometimes God does try and stop it, but the main way that God tries to stop it is by waking you and I up to saying, stop it. We are, you know, this is our lesson. God's not in this world to learn. We're here to learn. God's waiting for the students to wake up and start, living the lessons that we're down here to learn. I asked questions about the future. They took me into possible futures. I don't think that they were the future. I think that these things are probable futures. I asked him lots of personal questions. I asked Jesus a lot of questions about himself, about religion and stuff like that. I've gotten in all kinds of trouble for the things that Jesus said to me, because everybody hates what he said. I'll give you an example. I said to Jesus, and Jesus said, quote, I said to him, what's the best religion? And he said, quote, the religion that brings you closest to God. And I've gotten all kinds of hate mail from Christian brothers and sisters in Christ who don't want to hear that kind of an answer. And I said, what? And I said to Jesus, what kind of an answer is that? And he said, there are good people in bad religions and bad people in good religions. It's not about religion. It's about your relationship with God. And boy, that brings the hateful emails in even worse. Because, you know, you all know that if you aren't going to the Church of Christ, you're going to hell, right? I mean, you know, yeah, you know that. I know that. I'm just waiting for everybody. It was, I found Jesus to be loving, inclusive, kind, caring, and I believe that he is God's #1 rep. You know, he's the God repping. He's the guy that's repping God the best, and I went with that. We went through all this stuff, and it was wonderful. It was far superior to the graduate school experience I'd received at the University of California, Berkeley. That's why I don't give them any money in the Alumni Association, because I'm feeding it all up through the church to God, who needs my money more. And what does God need my money for? I don't have no idea. And they said, time for you to go back. And that was one of the worst things I've ever heard in my life. And so we had a huge argument, gigantic fight. I didn't want to come back here. I'm sorry. Don't take this personally. I didn't know you in '85 and you didn't know me. But, they told me that I wasn't really a candidate. I wouldn't fit in heaven at that time. Just, you know, didn't have the right kind of shoes to wear, and, you know, didn't have the right kind of manners. But, you know, what I lacked was a love. That's what you need to go into heaven. You need love. And I didn't have it. I didn't know about it. I hadn't worked the love part of me at all. So they said it would be better for me to come back into this world and try and experience that and do that. So my argument, I can't go through all the arguments because that's a really long thing, but basically my arguments were, okay, you send me back, I screw up, do I end up in the place that I don't want to mention its name, but you know what I mean, that place back there where it was, and they're going like, you'll screw up, we know you'll screw up, God made you a screw up. You know, that's how God created you. God created you a flawed human being so you could make lots of mistakes and you could learn from those mistakes. And they said, try not to enjoy the mistakes so much and keep doing them. And I said, so how do I do that? And they said, when you make a mistake, the first thing you got to do is you got to recognize that you did make a mistake, and rather than just blow it off, which was my normal thing. And then, if you really intended to try and do a better job with it, you could say to God, sorry. And before you even got the sorry out, it didn't even exist. Your mistake was negated in the big, eternal, the permanent record that you were threatened with. Well, they are actually keeping a permanent record. The one in high school was a joke, but this one's real. But you get to edit it and clean it up by trying not to make the mistakes and acknowledging them. It's that simple. God put us in this world to be successful. God, if you think of God as a heavenly mother, father, we got to have children and then create them so that they could screw up and then go to, some horrible place as a consequence of their utter failure. What kind of a mother, father? But that would be like one sick mother. Right? And God is not that kind of a mother, father. God is much more loving, much more merciful and generous and kind than any human mother or father. God put us down here to be successful. Someone sent me a bumper sticker the other day because in an email when he told me about it, I said, that is the perfect bumper sticker. I'm not that big on bumper sticker. It says, Life is a classroom. Love is the lesson. Bye. That's it. That's it. It's that simple. This is a classroom, and we're here to learn about love. If you try and do that loving thing, you're going to get to do it a whole lot more and become perfect in it when you leave this world. And if you reject it, you're history. You're toast. I don't want to go into that place anymore. There's a lot that we could talk about and speculate about that place, but trust me, you would not want your worst enemy. I mean, I'm not, this is a really hard thing for me to say, but I hope Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, and Osama bin Laden, and Saddam Hussein, I hope they don't go to that place. They seem to be trying really hard, but that's their thing. I wouldn't want anyone to go to that place, and God doesn't want them to go to that place either. But if they don't want to be love, if they don't want to do love and be love, they can't be with the supreme being of love. It won't work. Anyhow, so finally we had this big, huge argument. I'll just tell you one more thing that we argued was, I said to them, "You're going to kill me if you send me back." And they go, "I'm like, what?" And I said, and these are my exact thought words, I said, "I've never known any guys that love me as much as you love me." And I said, "You know it's going to break my heart, and I will die without your love." And they said, "You know, because we showed you that we've always been with you and we've always been around you." And I said, "I know it in my head, but when I go back, are you going to be hanging out so I can see you and I can talk to you and I can feel you?" And they would, "No." And I said, "That doesn't work for me. You know, your assurance that you're there, but I can't see you, I can't feel you, I can't hear you, I mean, you know, any of that stuff, it's like you're not there. And I'll be all alone and I will die." Because I said, you know, once I've known your love, I can't be apart from that love. And they said, "Well, there's a way to communicate." And I said, "What's that?" And they said, "Well, sit down. You got to be, it's really, really, really important that you be completely honest and straight up. No deceit, no hidden agendas. You got to like let it all hang out. Talk to us." And I said, "When you're done talking to us, just get real quiet and listen to us and be open to us being with you, and you will know in your heart through our love, and sometimes you'll know in your head, we're with you. We're always with you." So I went through the angels and Jesus and I said, "Do you promise? Do you promise? Do you promise?" I went right through every single one of them. And I got it, Jesus promised, and the angels, they wouldn't leave me alone. You know what? They're not going to leave you alone either. They're all around. They're hanging with us. I came back and as soon as I was back, I went back into that pain-filled body, and I couldn't talk because of the pain. It was overwhelming. And they immediately, the nurse and some more nurses came into the room, threw her out of the room, and prepared me for the operation, which I had that night. After the experience, I vividly remembered the whole experience, and I knew that the most important thing that had ever happened to me had happened to me that night prior to the surgery. But I couldn't help but wonder, did it really happen, or was this just the most incredible, hallucination, fabrication of my brain? Maybe it was all fabricated by my mind, and it never really happened. I doubted that it was a fabrication because I was a hedonist. And like if I was going to have a vivid hallucination, then why wouldn't it have something to do with my belief system? Something like 69 virgins, well-endowed virgins. That was my belief system. Where were where were they when you need, I didn't have that hallucination with the wine flowing freely and the, and the hot tub and all that stuff. But that wasn't there. I got something completely counter to everything that I cared and believed in. So one of the things I felt was like, if this was a fantasy, it was somebody else's fantasy. And why were they shoving their fantasy into my reality? The other thing that happened was I started conversing with the angels while I was conscious, while I was awake. And then the angels would come and pay me social calls, and they would be full-blown, physically there during the day while I was awake and conscious. And these were the same people that I'd met in the thing, so it's like pretty hard, like, gee, this would sort of be evidence that it was all real, wouldn't it? Since you keep coming back. And I'm talking about hundreds of visitations, not one or two. And we're talking. And then another thing that happened was, this was months later, I was looking at the Bible and I found out that a lot of things that I read in the Bible and interpreted, I wasn't under any religious instruction, but it was interpreting according to the Jesus that I met, were absolutely consistent, sometimes identical with the things that he had said to me. That he was an incredibly loving, fun, happy, cool, non-judgmental, beautiful being. And so I decided I'd go with that. Just go with that. I want to add a couple things here. Someone asked me earlier that if I would mention something about world cooperation. I just want to briefly say that God is pissed off because we're treating, and I'm speaking to us as the affluent and powerful of the world. I don't feel very affluent or powerful, but I am part of a system that's incredibly affluent and powerful. Okay, and you are too, and don't deny it, because we are, whether we appreciate it or not. There are millions of people in this world who are dying from malnutrition, dying from lack of medical care, dying because there are no educational opportunities, dying because there is not any work, decent work for them to do, dying because they live under oppressive, horrible governments, dying because we could care less. And one of the things that I've been trying to do with my life, I've put some documents on a table out there. The people, I've been working with Mayan Indians in Belize for the past 3.5 years. One village, one group of people in a world filled with millions, in fact hundreds of millions of people who need someone to care about, whom we need to develop. I have found from my work with these Indians, and I'm doing this because God is telling me to do it, and I'm just trying to cooperate. I've found from these my Maya friends that they have much more to offer me than the trinkets of computers and houses and books and medicine and stuff that we give them. They have much more to offer me in their wisdom and love and spirituality than I have to offer them. So it's a crazy bargain, because we go down there as the wealthy, powerful gringos to be missional towards them, and instead they do a mission on us and make us better human beings through their love and their riches, spiritual riches. Everybody in this world is our brother and sister, and God is really pissed off because we are treating a lot of people in this world, I don't know, do I have the guts to say it, including the people of Iraq and Afghanistan, we're treating them as if they are our enemy. And we need to start thinking on this world. You know how the scientists have recently discovered that we are all related? We all came from one mama in Africa? It's like, oh, it sounds like the Adam and Eve story. What was I thinking? We all came, genetically, we're all from one woman, one family. I mean, isn't that weird? We're all brothers and sisters. And I look at the people In Belize, when I first went down there, I thought they were weird, and I thought their culture was weird, and I thought their houses were weird. And now, a year ago, so people said, you're no longer a missionary in this village. You're now part of our family. That's the greatest honor I've ever had in my life, to be. I am an honorary member, family member of St. Victor Village. They're the most decent, wonderful people in this earth. And they are human beings. They have adultery, they have alcoholism. They do all the things that we like to do too, But they do it with a lot more style and a lot more love, a lot more commitment. That was one thing I want to mention. The other thing I want to mention was people always ask me, why did you have this experience? And there's a variety of reasons, and one of the reasons why I had this experience was because this rotten little nun named Sister Dolores, whom I met in 1973, on the day that I met her, I told her, I don't want you to mention religion in my classroom. I am an atheist, and I don't want to hear about religion in this painting class. She went home and started praying for me. And that terrible person, Sister Mary Dolores, Sister of Notre Dame, Park Hills, Kentucky, you can call her today if you want. She started praying for me every day. And then after a few years, when nothing happened, she got the whole convent praying on me. Isn't that the worst thing you ever heard? It was, so anyways, when I saw Sister Dolores after I came back to the United States and was getting well, I told her what happened to me. And I said, what do you think, sister, after she'd listened to me tell my story like you did? She said, I got one question. And I said, what is it? And she said, I wonder why it took so long. And I said, what took so long? And she said, I've been praying for you for 13 years. I wonder why it took God so long to get your attention. And it's amazed me, because I did not know she'd been praying for me. And then she said, I haven't just been praying for you. I've had the whole convent praying for you. So you just remember, if you want to change the world, first thing you do is you start praying, right? You start hammering. It's not that you're going to change God, but you can affect the course of people's lives through prayer. God's already got the whole thing figured out. What prayer does is it really just gets you into that God zone, and starts, you start having the power of prayer and the understanding of prayer. But anyways, that's another story. So that's one of the reasons why God gave me that story. So if you want to know why I'm here today telling you about how loving and good God is, you got to blame Sister Dolores. She's the culprit behind this whole conspiracy to make this world more loving. After my experience, I started going, I'll just make this really quick. After the experience when I got ambulatory, I went to a church because it was close and it was of the denomination that I had left 25 years earlier. I didn't even know of its existence, in fact, even though it was only a mile from my house. And when I walked into that church, the whole ceiling was filled with hundreds and hundreds of angels. The angels that I knew. The angels, some of the angels that I was familiar with. And I felt, yeah, this is definitely as close to heaven as I'm going to get, in a place where God is glorified, where people, and believe me, church people are a real funky bunch of people, because they're absolutely no better or worse than any other group of people in the world. The only difference is they want to know something about God. They want to know something about love, and they're making that feeble effort to do that God-love thing. That's the only difference between church people and everybody else. Because there are some people at Kroger's who are not interested in God and not interested in love. And they want to run you over with their cart. Hopefully you're not going to get run over in church, although it could happen, and it does happen occasionally. I felt church was a really good place to be working on that God thing. And when you think about it, how many other places do you know that are promoting love other than church? I can't think of a lot. I certainly respect the love that is promoted and done in this hospital, etc. But I wanted to be a part of it. So that led me on a course of joining the church, being involved with a lay ministry program, which took 3 years. And when I completed that, I announced to my wife that I wanted to go to seminary to become an ordained minister, which she was strongly opposed to, but gave into. And so when I was in my last year of seminary in 1990, I got placed in a dying church in Norwood, Ohio. And I've been in that church ever since 19. I started there in 90 or 91, whatever. I got ordained in 92 and was officially called by the church, moved up from a student pastor into an ordained minister at Zion United Church of Christ. And now that I'm 57, it looks like I'm going to be a one-church wonder. And my church is real unspectacular. It's the most ordinary church with just middle-class people. And although there are times when I hate being a minister and I hate everybody in the church, those times are very few and rare compared to the times that I feel like I'm the luckiest guy in the world to be able to serve this church and serve these people. I mean, I'm a human being, you know, I have emotional swings. And so some days they're good days and some days bad, but generally it's just real blessedness. You know the word bless, bliss, you know the same word, the difference between those, one's with an I and one's with an E, there is no difference between those two. So I got a bliss job. I hope you all have a bliss job, because I got a bliss job. Some days I don't appreciate the bliss as much as others, but it's really cool. And now that God has led me to a love relationship with some very cool Maya Indians in Central America, it's become even a more interesting adventure because you know I don't have the foggiest idea what I'm doing down there, so I'm trying to love and reciprocate this love. So that's the story. I did leave a few minutes for Q&A conversation. Yeah.
The appearance of your angels, we've all read different likenesses and given different descriptions. Can you share with us what they look like as they go in and out of your life?
Angels don't have wings. They have radiance. They have a radiance around them. And if you looked at the Hebrew meaning of the word for wings in the Bible and study it, you will find that the ancient Hebrew meaning was more of a radiance or something that emanates from them, and later on that because it was easy to understand, they were given wings. So the wing thing is a popular way to depict in the visual arts their angelic status. Okay? Angels can appear as human beings, and of course the scripture says always be hospitable to strangers because they may be angels in disguise, and there's a number of instances in the Bible where angels do in fact make appearances, sometimes known and sometimes unknown. I always wondered about Jacob wrestling with God at the fort of Jacob. Like, what was Jacob? I mean, you think I'm arrogant. Hey, Jacob, you're wrestling with God. You know, I'm like, what? What do you think? You know, you can't do that. I thought God was very kind just to whack him in the hip. You know, they should have whacked Jacob in the head. But anyways, so an angel can appear to be the most ordinary person. And I have met angels who I did not know were angels. I saw some angels that would visit me that brightened up the universe and were golden and pearlescent and white and radiant. You know, and I couldn't understand why people for blocks didn't realize what was going on, because I had these incredibly radiant, brilliant beings. I think in their more natural state, radiant angels are not so human appearing as they are beings of radiant energy. You know, big difference between us and our spiritual being is that in this world, we all think that we're heavy. I mean, oh great, I know I'm heavy, okay, oh, I know I'm heavy, I got it. You know, I mean heavy, I don't just mean, you know, I'm overweight, I mean heavy. Don't you feel heavy? I mean, doesn't your butt feel like it's really pushing down on that cushion of that chair, and you're heavy, you know, and this world is heavy. You know, run up these stairs 10 times and, you know, tell me how, you know, how it feels. I mean, you're going to be out of breath. It's like a lot of work. You know, everything in this world is an expenditure of energy, and everything's hard to do, and, you know, and we're opaque beings. Do you ever put a flashlight up against your hand and see the the light go through your hand. It's so cool. Or I really like to put it up under here and see the light go up through your nostrils and stuff. It's really scary. We're heavy, heavy beings made out of this colloidal, liquidy, solidy kind of materials, right? Gutsy. In heaven, we are energy-emitting beings. You've probably all heard this before, but you know why angels can fly? Because they take themselves lightly. Yeah. In this world, we're heavy, mostly opaque, extremely finite, limited beings. In our natural state, like the angels, we become radiant beings. We move through time and space without any effort whatsoever. We give light, we give energy. We don't take light, we don't take energy. And we become in cooperation with God, the whole source of creation. Without God and the heavenly symphony, there would be no universe. There'd be nothing. There wouldn't be nothing of nothing. That just So, anyways, that's in their more pure state, much more divine-like than we can even begin to imagine.
Thank you.
Yeah, the guy way back.
Do you feel that when you had this experience and you were talking with Jesus and the angels?
No, I knew I was talking to Jesus and the angel. I didn't feel it.
No, but when you had the experience, did you feel that what they were communicating to you was sort of, the best way I can describe it is adapted to your consciousness or your capability to understand?
Amen. Yeah, absolutely, positively. Absolutely, positively. It was shaped and spoken because I really want you to know this. Jesus, God, the angels, the whole crowd of heaven loves you just the way they are. Do you know that that funky little nose that you have on your face was custom designed for you? That hair, that smile, those eyes, your butt was given to you as a gift of love by God. And you better get over your attitude about it and start loving yourself just the way you are, because God made you that way, because God thinks it's pretty darn cute. God thinks you are, God thinks you're so cute, it's as if you were the only being in the whole universe. And God wants that cute, perfect, beautiful you that you are to be successful in doing the loving thing down here, which is what you came down here to receive and to give. That's what we're here for. You all know this. It has nothing to do with money. It has nothing to do with power. Although I'll take some money if you want to get rid of it. I do use it for what it costs. It doesn't have to do with looks. It doesn't have to do with whether you're tall or fat or, it has to do with love. We're all beautiful children of God, and we're going to get over this superficial nonsense. Right? Yeah. You can't ask questions, should camera. Yeah. Right.
How has this experience changed your relationship with your father or other men?
God, I don't know how this happened, but God gave me a wonderful gift. After my experience, my father and I became best friends, and then a few years later he died. And I'm so thankful that I had that opportunity to make amends with my father. He didn't change, and I didn't change. We just let the hostility go. But it was so wonderful. My mother said to me, she said, I don't understand it. Your father hasn't changed a bit. Matter of fact, he's getting worse. And you love him and he loves you. What are you doing? And I said, I'm doing something, Mom, that you and my sisters haven't figured out yet. I'm just loving him and I'm not trying to change him anymore. I know he is a mean old SOB and I don't care. I love him just as a mean old SOB. I just love him the way he is and I'm not going to change him anymore. And when you stop trying to change him and make him a better person, you'll be able to love him. Yeah.
In this schoolhouse that we're in here,
Yeah.
are there any other schools or dimensions that we transcend toward?
Oh yeah, lots. I mean,
Can you be-
infinite. So this is and this was told to me of Jesus, this is not speculation. This would be like pre-nursery school. This is kinder care, okay? Before you get to go to nursery, that's what this is, kinder care. This world. There are worlds where people are living Christ-like lives and learning greater spiritual lessons. When you go to heaven, there are places in heaven, places in other dimensions, places all over the world where you can have more experiences and more learning and perfection. I'm not Catholic, but the Catholic Church has this wonderful concept called purgatory, which means you get to be made perfect. Forget the purgatory of, you're going to get your butt kicked down there. That's not what God's interested in. God's going to take you to a purgatory to perfect you. Okay? That's the word purgatory. It comes from Greek fire, where we get the word pure, P-U-R-E, purgatory, perfection, completeness. And you're going to be on a spiritual journey being perfected. Where that takes you, it is like the greatest adventure of the world. Mother Teresa, poor woman, she only gets to do a little bit of perfecting, right? I feel sorry for her. You and I, we might get to do a lot of perfecting, right? Because we've got a lot further to go. So no matter what happens, it's going to be great. It's going to be wonderful. I mean, how would you like to go experience in heaven or in some place that God sends you on to a world where everyone is into that loving, Christ-like relationship sort of thing? Wouldn't that be cool? I mean, I'd be happy to go on. No one goes to God the Father, God the Mother, God the Creator, God the Supreme Being until they are perfect. That isn't, they were told me this as an absolute necessity. You have to be perfect before you go in front of the Supreme Being. So, no hurry. You got eternity.
So do you believe in reincarnation, that we evolve and we're starting this spiritual evolution at this point?
I have no faith in reincarnation in the sense that we just keep living. Reincarnation in the Hindu or Buddhist sense was we live millions and millions of lives in this world, and then this world is annihilated, and then we start at the beginning and do millions and millions of lives again. That system to me is utter nonsense, utter futility, and it's not the God that I know. Okay? When people talk about reincarnation, it's like, which system of reincarnation would we be talking about? Because if you're talking about traditional Hindu and Buddhist reincarnation, I utterly reject it. It's wrong.
So how do you evolve to be an angel then?
You have many, many life experiences.
Right.
This is probably, unless you're really, really backward, you probably don't need to do much here. One would be sufficient for most people. Okay? You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Okay. I'll beat it up. Yeah?
I just want to thank you. What impressed me so much is your truth and honesty. I am overwhelmed with the way you speak about everything.
Oh, thanks. That's really kind of you. Would you come and tell my church what do people in your church just throw all these compliments at you and tell you?
No,
I don't get it either.
No.
What? I come to a place.
Especially not at board meetings.
Yeah. You come to a place like this and people tell you you're wonderful, you're honest, and people in my church say you're lazy, you're no good, you're not attentive to our needs. I mean, like.
She's got a question.
No, she answered it.
Oh,
She answered it. You
okay.
answered it.
So do we do some of our perfecting on these other planets, or are they on a different path?
Yeah, other planets, other worlds, other states of being. It's all in God's hand, but like one thing they made absolutely clear, we're either moving, our progression is towards God or it's away from God. If you're progressing towards God, no worries. You know? If you're progressing away from God, I would do some serious decision making. You know? I mean, reevaluate what I'm doing. And there are people who this is the truth. I was at the WEBN fireworks on the Ohio River a couple of years ago, and there was a 17, 18-year-old young man walking in front of me, and I had a grandkid in each hand. He was walking. We're in a crowd of between about 300,000 to 500,000 people. I got my grandkids in each hand. My daughter's behind me with a grandkid, my son-in-law and stuff, walking through this crowd to see the fireworks. And this young man had a black T-shirt on with white letters. I'm going to hell, I know it, and I don't care. And I will never, ever forget him, because I could not let go of my grandkids, obviously, because I wanted to reach out and grab him by the shoulder and say, brother, don't mean what you're saying on that T-shirt. I know you mean it, because you're wearing, I mean, if you're wearing it, you probably mean it, but don't mean that, because you don't know what you're getting yourself into, you know? You really don't understand what that shirt says. And I could not let go of my grandkids. And I mean, you know, what could so I let him move on, and he disappeared into the crowd, and I'll never ever forget that kid, and I prayed for him, you know? Because we don't want anybody to go, we don't know who's going to hell. Nobody in this world. Anyone who dares to say another person is going to hell is almost condemning themselves by being that judgmental. Okay, but you can say when someone's like got it printed on their chest, you know, like, what are you thinking? This isn't a joke. You know, it's not that funny.
Well, you're his sister Dolores.
Yeah.
That's that gentleman. You are his sister Dolores.
Yeah, yeah. Not half as good a person, though. Sister Laura's way ahead of me. Yeah.
So when you say go to hell, in your experience, is that a place that some people go forever? Or is that
Let me put it this way. In eternity, it's like forever. What happens to them in hell, I don't know. Here's a fantasy. This has no bearing on reality. It's my fantasy. You know, in the Christian tradition, Jesus went to hell after his crucifixion and before his resurrection, and he preached. Nobody ever wrote what happened, but I figure he just really impressed some people in hell who were very tired of that, and they changed their minds. You know, do you know what I'm talking about? That's part of the Christian tradition that has been around in Christianity since the get-go. And if you want to read about it, it's in 2 Peter. I believe that he practically emptied the place. I don't know, but I think, you know, if I were in hell and Jesus came down and preached a good message, I think I'd say, yeah, can I come with the crowd? You know, you got room for me? Will he do that again? I mean, it's just pure fantasy on my part. But God doesn't want those people in hell. But here's the bad part. Here's the really, really, really bad part. You go to hell and you get turned into one of those beings. You don't want Jesus, you don't want God, and you devolve and degenerate to the pot where you become just cruelty and hate and torment. That's the really scary part. That even if Jesus Christ himself were to show up in hell, those people that have been in hell for eternity have now gotten to the point where they can't even when I was there praying to God, they couldn't bear the name of God. They fled from the name of God. You know, people in this world, they've degenerated through alcoholism to the point where even when you try and offer them help, they reject the help, right? That's the really, really scary part, yeah.
When in meeting people, how do you decide how much or when to talk about this experience?
That's a really good point. When you meet people, you know, initially I tried to lay it on people. Bad mistake on my part. You cannot lay the spiritual goodness on anybody. You have to be invited. So the answer to your question is simple. Someone has to invite me. Otherwise, I don't bring it up. I've had people like whack me with an elbow. Tell me your experience, tell me your experience. I'm not telling until they ask for it, because I tried laying it on people and it backfired every time. I drove more people away from God and Christ by trying to convert them. I absolutely do not believe in forced conversion. I think putting a gun to someone's head, trying to emotionally blackmail them, through fear or guilt or something like that into believing in a loving God. I mean, think about it, it's crazy. It's counterproductive. That's what I believe. Yeah.
How did your colleagues treat you after this transformation?
They hated me and they rejected me. Pretty sad.
Your experience with Jesus Christ, how does that equate with the major religions in the world? Do I hear you say that Jesus is the only way?
I think that the way of Jesus is the only way.
So
Jesus said,
the Muslims,
no, you didn't hear me. Let me explain. I said, the way of Jesus is the only way. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. I absolutely believe that. I think that the way of Jesus, which, to put it very simply, is the way of love, is the only way to God. The truth of the way of Jesus is the only truth that will get you into heaven. The life, the Christ-like life, is the only way. I believe that there are people in this world who have never heard of Jesus Christ, who are His disciples and are His followers. I believe in 1 John, in the prologue of 1 John, that the world was made through Christ. Everything that was made in the world was made through the Christ, and everything in the world was made through the Christ. And I believe what my theology professor Gwynye Muzarera said when he said, I feel sorry for you. Students, he said this in seminary and systematic theology, he said, I feel sorry for you because if you read the Bible, you know that the Christ is throughout the whole world, speaking to the whole world. And that Gwynye said, quote, we in Africa have always had the Christ. We've known the Christ, and the missionaries brought your special understanding of the Christ to us, and I'm thankful for it. But don't ever think we haven't known the Christ and been with the Christ. And I believe that the Christ is in Asia, the Christ is in Africa, the Christ is, in Latin America, and Australia, always has been, always will be. What Christianity brought to the world was a very interesting understanding. Jesus, in his essential message, did not say anything that the people of Israel hadn't been saying for 2,000 years before. The scripture in the lectionary last week, if any of you do that sort of thing, was in Mark 12, where lawyer came up to Jesus and said, which is the greatest commandment? And he said, the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And you should love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. And the second law, much like the first, that you should love your neighbor as yourself. And you know what? Any rabbi would have told you the exact same thing. What Jesus brought to us was his, which I believe, even more intimate understanding of the love of God, and calling us into a loving and intimate relationship with God, which unfortunately, with the exception of the Jewish people, most of the people in the world were somehow missing. When our Aztec friends took those 40,000 people up to celebrate a big holiday up the steps and ripped every single one of those 40,000 hearts out in an afternoon, somehow they're missing that love and feeling, And not that I'm up here to beat on the Aztecs, and if any of you are Aztec, I'm sorry, but that was a pretty strange way to please a loving God. Yeah.
What would you say to the ministers that are getting in front of their pulpits, in front of the television, and preaching hatred, bigotry, and theirs is the only way,
I would say,
and fire and brimstone?
I would say to them something that I would never ever say to you. I would say something specially for them. You're going to hell if you keep that kind of stuff up, because anybody that represents God as a hateful, cruel, unjust, and exclusive God is an enemy of God. And you better think about being what you're doing as an enemy of God, because the ultimate consequence of that activity is that you are going to be rejected by God. So you better start thinking about what it is you're doing to these people. I personally hate that, and I think that these people are really playing with a sinful state of being that is ultimately unforgivable. To depict God as small, cruel, mean, exclusive, that's not who God is. And anyone who tries to depict that God that way is doing a huge disservice to God. And, you know, God's not real happy about that.
How do you get word to that?
Here's the hook.
Howard has to go back tonight to Cincinnati because he has a sermon to preach tomorrow morning,
Yeah, which is only half done.
which is only half done.
Anybody got any
We will
ideas?
allow a couple of minutes for him to sign books for you. We will be going to Ruby's, but we have to cut out fairly quickly from Ruby's. Ruby's of Siam on Skokie Boulevard in Skokie. So just south of Gulf Road. And anybody wants to know. Thank you, Howard. Thank you so much. You are welcome. See you all next month. Showers, goodbye. See you all next month.